If you're a current user of Final Cut Pro, are pretty familiar with NLEs, or are just curious about what the whole deal is with this Final Cut Pro 10 thing, this movie is for you, because I'm going to talk about my 5 favorite features of Final Cut Pro 10, as well as the stuff that's really weird to me about it. If you're not familiar with Final Cut Pro, or what multi-track editing is, and you're just wondering about whether or not you should invest in Final Cut Pro 10, check out my other Final Cut Pro 10 movie, because I'm not talking about that stuff here. Alright, let's get the weird stuff out of the way right now. There's going to be plenty of discussion on some of this stuff, and this is just scratching the surface. But I'll tell you the 3 big things that I find weird at first glance. The first weird thing? You can't open old Final Cut Pro files in Final Cut Pro 10. Don't bother looking for that import button that lets you bring in legacy project files because it doesn't exist, at least not in the 0.0 release. It won't import EDLs or XML files, so don't think you're going to do that either, because it's not happening. I guess with the big shift to have interrelated pro apps that speak to each other, and background rendering and all that good stuff, they decided to do away with allowing one editing system to talk to another. But it's kind of a bummer that those legacy projects that I spent so many hours on can't benefit from Final Cut Pro 10's powerful new features unless I rebuild them from the ground up. The second weird thing? I'm just going to say it. I hate the video and audio skimming. It makes me feel all weird and jumpy. It's true you can turn them off quickly enough with buttons in the upper right corner of the timeline, but there isn't a very good way of previewing your stuff in the event browser without having the dreaded skimming turned on or inadvertently selecting clips. So get ready for skimming whether you want to or not. If you're used to iMovie though, this will be a treat because it's the same deal there. I'll probably get over it, but I'm not thrilled with it at the moment. The third weird thing is figuring out the nesting. As you'll hear in a minute, I dig the compound clips, and you can use them to really clean up your timeline. But unless you really pay attention to this display in the upper left corner of the timeline, you may end up editing within your compound clip, and if you're all haptic like me and accidentally double-click on a clip in the event browser, instead of opening the old canvas like before, you'll move into timeline editing mode and start editing that one clip within the timeline, which means you could make some edits here, then move back out and combine this with some other clips to form a compound clip, and then have to go 2 or 3 layers deep to find that original edit or expand them all and get a super blowout view. That's a lot for my small brain to get a handle on. Okay, enough weirdness. That stuff is weird, granted, but there are more cool things than weird things, so let's jump into those. You can see a big ol' list of the new features on Apple's site. There are a ton of them, and I'm not going to talk about them all here, just my favorites. If you just want a laundry list with some shiny graphics, go to apple.com/finalcutpro and click on All Features. Did those guys leave to check it out? Is it just us now? Awesome, let's get rolling. Number 1. You can now start to log and edit while importing from SD cards. I work with a lot of footage with little cameras that use flash media storage, and let's just say nobody hands me an awesome log sheet. With Final Cut's ability to keyword sections of clips, and you'll hear about that in a second, the ability to start logging before the video's even on my computer fully is going to help keep me from drinking too much coffee, which is what I used to do while waiting for a capture to finish. Number 2, iMovie import. Okay, alright, I just heard some of you rolling your eyes. Don't be like that. iMovie is free, it's preloaded on Macs, and it turns out some fine-looking video. This feature should be especially exciting for anybody in education, because students and teachers can now start a project in iMovie and then move it over to Final Cut for super cool editing and effects. Nearly all of the stuff that you add in iMovie remains editable in Final Cut, so you can offline in iMovie and jump right into Final Cut when you're ready for the big guns. Number 3. Range-based keywords. Raise your hand if you've ever started logging little, well-organized clips, and then just after what feels like 1,000 hours of doing that, you just said, let's just go ahead and capture the rest, and I'll log it and cut it up later. We can now capture big old clips, and then just select a range within that clip to tag. So if my clip contains a bridge, and then we pan down to the shoreline, I can just tag the range with the bridge with the keyword bridge, and the other range with the word shore, and that's it. No cutting it up, no clips, subclips, or master clips, just range-based keywords. Nice. Number 4, timeline editing. I'm just lumping in a bunch of things into this category because they're all kind of related. Final Cut Pro 10 has really stepped up the way we edit in the timeline, and although it's going to take some getting used to, I love the workflow. Three big highlights in the timeline. Magnetic timeline, which basically keeps you from having to lock down tracks or use a bajillion tracks to keep from accidentally overwriting stuff you've laid into the timeline. Compound clips, to help you keep your timeline from becoming a jumbled mess when things start getting complicated. And split edits, which makes J and L cuts super easy. Number 5, the output options. Finishing in Final Cut Pro has been streamlined and polished a bit, with more output options rolled in. I know I was wondering where DVD Studio Pro went, and we've got the answer here. They rolled it into Final Cut Pro 10. DVD layouts, encoding, burning, it's all part of the new Final Cut Pro 10 output options, so there's no need to jump to another application now. Just rock and roll right there. There are a bunch of other cool features in the new Final Cut Pro 10, like getting rid of transcoding in sequences, audio sweetening, color correction tools, effects and titles, and others. But these 5 were my main reason for jumping into the deep end of the pool and buying it. Just like any pro app though, don't buy it and then move over some rough cut you're in the middle of. Keep to the stable version you're working on until there is at least 1 or 2 updates to the 0.0 release. And make sure you know where all those little buttons are before you take a paying gig over to the new version. It takes some getting used to, especially working without a canvas and just having that big old viewer. But the awkward phase passes quickly, and then there's just a bunch of awesomeness. We've got a bunch of projects on Atomic Learning that can be adapted to Final Cut to help you work through functions, and a great video storytelling guide to help build that vocabulary and understand how different shots and edits are used to tell your story. Keep your eye on Atomic Learning for more on video storytelling, editing, and Final Cut Pro 10, and happy editing.